The howling wind carried the sound of the approaching train, a mournful wail that cut through the blinding white of the worst blizzard Clifton Hill, Missouri had seen in 20 years. Yates Montgomery stood rigid on the platform, his tall frame braced against the onslaught of snow and ice, refusing to abandon his post even as the station master urged him to seek shelter. The letter in his breast pocket, worn thin from countless readings, had promised Catherine O'Malley would arrive on Wednesday's train from Boston, and Wednesday it now was, blizzard be damned. "You're a stubborn fool, Montgomery," shouted Harold Peterson, the elderly station master, his voice nearly lost in the wind as he retreated to the relative warmth of his office. "No trains coming through this. Not today." But Yates merely pulled his sheepskin coat tighter around his broad shoulders and lowered the brim of his hat. At 32, he had spent 15 years building his ranch from nothing, 15 years of backbreaking work, lonely nights and endless prairie. 15 years of waiting for someone to make the empty house at the center of it all feel like a home. The letter had been brief, but had stirred something in him. Catherine O'Malley, 26, educated, from a good family, fallen on hard times after her father's death. She sought a new beginning in the West, away from painful memories and mounting debts. Her penmanship was elegant, her words carefully chosen. When she had answered his advertisement for a mail-order bride, Yates had felt something he hadn't in years: hope. The train whistle sounded again, closer now, though visibility was nearly zero in the swirling snow. Yates straightened, squinting into the whiteness. The platform beneath his feet trembled as the great iron beast approached, slowing with a screech of brakes and billowing steam that mingled with the snow. "My God," he muttered, watching as the locomotive finally emerged from the wall of white, its front covered in ice, looking like some mythical creature from a frozen hell. The train shuddered to a complete stop. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door to one of the passenger cars opened, and the conductor appeared, helping a single passenger down the treacherous steps. She was wrapped in a heavy wool coat, a scarf concealing most of her face, but Yates could see a pair of bright blue eyes peering out from between the layers. She clutched a small carpetbag in gloved hands, and as her boots touched the platform, a gust of wind nearly knocked her over. Yates moved without thinking, crossing the distance between them in long strides. "Miss O'Malley," he called over the howling wind. The woman looked up, her eyes widening. "Mr. Montgomery," she replied, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "Welcome to Clifton Hill," he said, reaching for her bag. "Though I reckon the town's putting on its worst face to greet you." "The conductor said this is the worst storm in decades," she said, relinquishing her bag to him. "He warned everyone else to stay on until the next stop, but I insisted. Our agreement was for today, and I didn't want to." Her words were cut off as another violent gust hit them. "We need to get inside," Yates said, offering her his arm. "The station's just there." Catherine took his arm, her grip tight through her gloves. Together they battled the short distance to the station master's office, where Harold Peterson was stoking a pot-bellied stove. "Good Lord, you actually made it," the old man exclaimed as they stumbled inside, bringing a flurry of snow with them. "Madam, you must be either the bravest or the most foolhardy woman I've ever met." Catherine pulled down her scarf, revealing a face flushed from cold but undeniably lovely, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw. "I believe punctuality is a virtue, sir, regardless of the weather." Harold chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a good match for this one, then," he said, gesturing to Yates. "Been standing out there since dawn, he has. Wouldn't budge an inch." Catherine turned to Yates, surprise evident in her expression. "Since dawn. But the train wasn't due until noon." I didn't want to risk missing you, Yates said simply, suddenly self-conscious about his frozen beard and the snow melting from his hat. And given the storm, I wasn't sure when exactly you'd arrive. A small smile touched her lips. That was very considerate, Mr. Montgomery. Yates, he corrected gently. If we're to be married, Miss O'Malley, I think we might dispense with formalities. Catherine, she replied, her smile widening slightly, or Kate, if you prefer. Most do. Harold moved to the window, peering out at the worsening storm. I hate to interrupt your introductions, but you two need to decide what you're doing. This train's only stopping for 10 minutes to take on water, and then it's pushing on to Jefferson City. The road to your ranch, Yates, it'll be impassable by now. Yates frowned, considering their options. His ranch lay 15 miles outside of town, a journey that would be treacherous, if not impossible, in these conditions. Is Gertrude's boarding house still open? Harold nodded. It is, though I reckon she's not had many guests lately, but it's 3 blocks from here. 3 blocks in this. Catherine asked, glancing toward the window where snow was accumulating on the sill outside. I don't see much choice, Yates said grimly. We can't make it to the ranch tonight, and we can't stay here. Certainly not, Harold agreed quickly. My wife would have my hide if she thought I let a lady sleep on the station floor. Catherine drew a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Very well, 3 blocks it is then. Yates admired her composure. Many women would be in tears by now, arriving to meet their future husband only to be immediately trapped by a blizzard. But Catherine O'Malley showed a steely resolve that impressed him. We'll tie a rope between us, he said, already removing his belt, so we don't get separated in the whiteout. Catherine watched as he fashioned a makeshift tether, looping one end around his wrist and offering the other to her. Is it really that bad out there? She asked quietly. Worse, Harold answered for him. People have died getting lost in blizzards like this, just trying to find their way from the barn to the house. You can't see, can't hear in the cold. It confuses the mind. Catherine nodded solemnly and extended her wrist for Yates to secure the belt. Their eyes met as he gently fastened the leather, and for a moment the howling storm outside seemed to fade away. There was something in her gaze, intelligence, curiosity, and perhaps a hint of the same loneliness he had been carrying for years. Ready? He asked, his voice rougher than he intended. She nodded, rewrapping her scarf so that only her eyes remained visible. Godspeed, Harold said as Yates pulled open the door, releasing a blast of Arctic air into the warm office. Don't make any detours, you hear? Yates raised a hand in acknowledgement, and then he and Catherine stepped out into the maelstrom. The force of the wind was immediate and brutal, pushing against them like a living thing. Yates wrapped a protective arm around Catherine's shoulders, drawing her close to his side as they began their arduous journey through the blinding snow. They moved slowly, each step a battle against the elements. The rope connecting them was their lifeline, and Yates found himself grateful for Catherine's determination as she pressed forward beside him, never faltering even when drifts rose to her knees. The streets of Clifton Hill, normally busy with wagons and townspeople, were completely deserted, transformed into an alien landscape of white. It took nearly 45 minutes to cover the 3 blocks to Gertrude Miller's boarding house, a journey that would normally take 5 minutes at a leisurely pace. When they finally reached the front porch, Catherine was trembling violently from cold, and even Yates, accustomed to harsh prairie winters, felt the bite of frostbite on his exposed skin. The door swung open before they could knock, and Gertrude Miller's round face appeared, her expression a mixture of shock and relief. "Lord have mercy," she exclaimed, ushering them inside. "Harold sent a boy running through the back alleys to tell me you were coming." I thought for sure you'd be frozen solid by now." The warmth of the boarding house entryway hit them like a physical force. Yates helped Catherine remove her ice-encrusted outer garments, his fingers clumsy with cold as he unwound the scarf from her face. Her lips had a bluish tint and snow clung to her eyelashes, but she managed a smile. "Thank you for taking us in, Mrs. Miller," she said through chattering teeth. "Gertrude, please," the older woman insisted, already guiding Catherine toward the fire blazing in the parlor. "And you must be the bride Yates has been waiting for, though I must say, your timing could have been better, dear. The weather wasn't quite this dramatic when I boarded the train in St. Louis," Catherine replied with a surprising touch of humor. Gertrude chuckled, helping Catherine into a chair close to the fire. "Yates, there's hot coffee in the kitchen. Bring a cup for your lady here before she turns into an icicle." Yates nodded and headed to the kitchen, grateful for a moment to collect himself. This was not how he had envisioned meeting his bride. In his mind, he would have greeted her at the station on a clear day, driven her to his ranch in his best wagon, and shown her the home he had built with his own hands. Instead, they were stranded in town, forced into close quarters before they'd had a chance to become properly acquainted. When he returned with the coffee, Catherine had removed her boots and was warming her stockinged feet by the fire. The color was returning to her cheeks, and she had unpinned her hat, revealing thick auburn hair coiled in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She looked up as he entered, and he was struck again by the clarity of her blue eyes. "Here," he said, offering the steaming cup. "It'll warm you from the inside." She accepted it gratefully, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Thank you, Yates." Gertrude bustled about, bringing blankets and fussing over them both. "Now, I've only the one room available, the blue room at the top of the stairs. I know it's not ideal for a couple who's just met, but we'll manage," Yates said quickly, seeing Catherine's momentary discomfort. "Perhaps I could sleep in this chair by the fire." "Nonsense," Gertrude declared. "That chair would cripple a man your size. There's a perfectly comfortable divan in the blue room. I'll make it up as a second bed." She turned to Catherine with a sympathetic smile. "This isn't quite how you imagined starting your new life in Missouri, is it, dear?" Catherine took a sip of her coffee before answering. "Life rarely follows the paths we imagine for it, Mrs. Miller. I've learned to adapt." Something in her tone, a quiet resignation, perhaps made Yates wonder about the circumstances that had driven her to become a mail-order bride. Her letters had been sparse with personal details, focusing instead on practical matters. Her skills as a housekeeper, her basic medical knowledge, her ability to keep accounts. He knew her father had been a doctor who had died leaving substantial debts, but little else of her past. As night fell, the blizzard showed no signs of abating. The wind howled around the eaves of the boarding house, rattling the windows in their frames. After a simple dinner of beef stew and fresh bread, Gertrude showed them to the blue room, which was small but cozy, with a brass bed, a writing desk, and the promised divan positioned near the window. "I've left extra blankets for you, Mr. Montgomery," Gertrude said, gesturing to the neatly made-up divan. "It gets drafty by that window." "I appreciate your hospitality, Gertrude," Yates said sincerely. "We both do." When the landlady had gone, closing the door behind her, an awkward silence fell between them. Catherine stood by the bed, her carpetbag at her feet, suddenly looking uncertain. "I'll step outside while you prepare for bed," Yates offered, already moving toward the door. "Thank you," she said softly. "I won't be long." Yates waited in the hallway, listening to the muffled sounds of movement from within. His thoughts were a jumble of impressions. The surprising delicacy of her wrist as he had tied the rope around it, the determination in her stride as they battled through the snow, the quiet dignity with which she had handled the unexpected circumstances of their meeting. When Catherine called for him to return, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed in a high-necked nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. The auburn waves reached nearly to her waist, and Yates was momentarily transfixed by the sight. "I hope you don't mind," she said, misinterpreting his stare. "I usually braid it for sleep, but my fingers are still numb from the cold." "Of course not," Yates replied, deliberately turning his attention to the divan. "You should take the extra blankets. The bed may have a quilt, but it's still going to be a cold night." "I'm quite warm-blooded, actually," she said with a small smile. "Even in Boston winters, I rarely needed more than a single blanket." An uncomfortable silence descended again, as they both became acutely aware of the intimacy of the situation, two near strangers preparing to spend the night in the same room, with only a hasty exchange of letters to connect them. "Perhaps," Catherine ventured, "we might use this time to become better acquainted. Our correspondence was necessarily brief, and there's much I still don't know about you." Yates sat on the edge of the divan, removing his boots. "What would you like to know?" She considered for a moment. "You mentioned in your letters that you built your ranch yourself. Where did you come from originally? Do you have family elsewhere?" "I came west from Pennsylvania after the war," Yates answered, setting his boots neatly beside the divan. "My parents died of fever when I was 16. I joined the Union Army at 17, served until 65, then decided I'd had enough of the East." He paused, wondering how much of his past she needed to know now. "I've no siblings, no family to speak of. The ranch is all I have." Catherine nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And it's a cattle ranch, cattle and horses," he confirmed. "Started with just 10 acres and 3 cows. Now I've got nearly 1,000 acres and a herd of 200 head. The horses are a more recent venture. I breed quarter horses for the cavalry and working stock for other ranchers." "It sounds impressive," she said sincerely. "You've accomplished a great deal on your own." "And you?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Your letters mentioned your father was a doctor, but little else of your life in Boston." A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, my father practiced medicine in Boston for 30 years. My mother died when I was 12 consumption, and afterward it was just the two of us. He educated me himself, taught me to assist in his practice. I thought—" She paused, swallowing visibly. "I thought we would continue that way, but then he became ill, heart failure. The last year of his life was difficult." "I'm sorry," Yates said quietly. "The debts mounted quickly," she continued, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. "Medical expenses, household costs that I couldn't meet on my own. When he died, the creditors took almost everything. I worked as a companion to an elderly woman for a time, but when she passed away last autumn, I found myself with few prospects." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "I want you to know that I didn't answer your advertisement out of desperation, Mr. Montgomery Yates. I could have found another position, perhaps as a governess or shop girl. But I wanted something different, something more than the life I had known. When I read your letter about the ranch, about the life you've built, I thought perhaps I could be part of building something too." The honesty in her words touched something deep within him. "I believe you could," he said simply, "and I hope you will." Catherine smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her face, warming her blue eyes. "Then we have an understanding." They talked for hours that night, the howling wind outside creating a strange sense of isolation that encouraged confidences. Catherine told him about growing up in Boston, about her father's practice and the patients she had helped tend. Yates spoke of his ranch, describing the layout of the house, the view from the front porch, the spring that ran through the north pasture. As the night deepened, Their conversation drifted to more personal matters. Catherine confessed her apprehension about prairie life, the isolation and harsh conditions she had read about. Yates acknowledged the challenges but spoke passionately about the beauty of the open land, the satisfaction of working soil that belonged to him alone. "The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away," he told her. "The nearest town, Clifton Hill, is 15 miles. In winter, sometimes we go weeks without seeing another soul." "We?" she questioned. "My ranch hands, there's 4 of them. They bunk in a separate house about a 1/4 mile from the main house. Good men, all of them. They keep to themselves mostly, except at mealtimes. And they know about me." "About our arrangement," Yates nodded. "They do. They've been giving me no end of grief about it, truth be told. They think I should have married years ago." "And why didn't you?" Catherine asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Yates was silent for a long moment. "Never seemed to be the right time," he said finally. "First I was building the ranch, then expanding it. Before I knew it, a decade had passed, and the local girls were all married off or too young. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "the women around here tend to want a man who comes to town more than twice a month for supplies." Catherine laughed softly, and the sound warmed him more than the fire ever could. "And what made you decide on a mail-order bride? Surely there are unmarried women in Jefferson City or St. Louis who might have been interested in a prosperous rancher." "I wanted someone who chose this life knowing what it entailed," he answered honestly. "Not someone who would come to resent the isolation or the work. In my advertisement, I was explicit about the hardships. I figured any woman who still wanted to come after reading that would have the strength of character needed to be a rancher's wife." "And do you think I have that strength?" she asked, her voice quiet. Yates looked at her thoughtfully. "I believe you do. You arrived in the middle of a blizzard and didn't falter once on that walk from the station. That tells me something about the kind of woman you are." A comfortable silence fell between them then, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the persistent howl of the wind. Catherine's eyelids began to droop, exhaustion from her long journey finally catching up with her. "You should sleep," Yates said gently. "It's been a long day," she nodded, stifling a yawn. "Yes, I suppose it has." She slipped beneath the covers but remained sitting up, watching as he moved to extinguish the lamp. "Yates?" "Yes. Thank you for waiting at the station today. Even with the blizzard, it means a great deal to know you were there." In the dim light, he could just make out the sincerity in her eyes. "I gave my word I would meet you," he said simply. "Good night, Catherine." "Good night, Yates." He turned the lamp down, plunging the room into darkness save for the faint glow from the embers in the fireplace. As he settled onto the divan, pulling the blankets over himself, Yates realized that for the first time in years he felt a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. Catherine O'Malley was not what he had expected. She was more intelligent, more resilient, more intriguing. And despite the inauspicious beginning to their acquaintance, he found himself looking forward to the days ahead. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but within the blue room at Gertrude Miller's boarding house, a fragile peace had settled, a first step on a journey neither of them could have anticipated. Dawn brought no respite from the storm. If anything, the blizzard had intensified overnight, with snow now piled halfway up the boarding house windows and drifts reaching the eaves in some places. Yates stood at the window, watching as occasional gusts created whiteout conditions that obscured even the building across the street. Behind him, Catherine was just stirring, her hair tousled from sleep, her eyes still heavy-lidded as she sat up. "Is it still snowing?" she asked, her voice husky. "It is," Yates confirmed, turning from the window, "and from the look of things it won't be stopping any time soon." Catherine pushed her hair back from her face, fully awake now. "So we're stranded here." "For today at least," he said with a nod. "No one will be traveling in this." She seemed to consider this, then shrugged slightly. "Well, I suppose there are worse fates than being snowbound in a warm boarding house." Her pragmatism brought a smile to his face. "Indeed there are. I'll step out while you dress." When they descended to the dining room a short while later, they found Gertrude serving breakfast to her only other guests, a traveling salesman named Elias Porter, and a young schoolteacher, Miss Fiona Brown, who had arrived the previous day before the worst of the storm hit. "Good morning, you two," Gertrude greeted them warmly. "I trust you slept well despite the wind." "Very well, thank you," Catherine replied, taking a seat at the table. "Though I'm sorry to see the weather hasn't improved." "Worst blizzard since '68, Porter commented, buttering a piece of toast. "That one lasted 5 days and buried half the county. Lost a lot of livestock in that one, we did." "Don't be scaring the young lady with such talk," Gertrude scolded, placing plates of eggs and bacon before Yates and Catherine. "This storm will blow itself out by tomorrow, I'm certain." Miss Brown, a bespectacled woman of about 30, leaned toward Catherine with interest. "Mrs. Miller tells us you're Mr. Montgomery's mail-order bride. How fascinating. I've read about such arrangements but never met anyone who'd actually entered into one." Catherine handled the direct question with grace. "Yes, Mr. Montgomery and I have been corresponding for several months. I arrived yesterday from Boston." "Boston!" Porter exclaimed. "My word, that's quite a change. What brings a city lady like yourself all the way out to Missouri cattle country?" Yates tensed, prepared to intervene if the questioning became too intrusive, but Catherine merely smiled. "A desire for a different sort of life, Mr. Porter. Boston has its charms, but I found myself ready for new horizons." "And did you find what you were expecting when you arrived?" Miss Brown pressed, clearly intrigued by Catherine's situation. Catherine's eyes flicked briefly to Yates before she answered. "I haven't seen much beyond the snowdrifts as yet, but Mr. Montgomery has been everything his letters promised." Something warm unfurled in Yates's chest at her words. He had worried, in the dark hours of the night, that she might be disappointed by the reality of him, a rough-hewn rancher with calloused hands and weathered features, a man more comfortable with cattle than conversation. Breakfast continued with lighter topics, mainly centered around the storm and its likely duration. Porter, who traveled the region regularly selling farm implements, provided updates on conditions in neighboring counties, while Miss Brown shared news from Jefferson City, where she had been attending a teachers' conference. After the meal, the day stretched before them with little to do but wait out the storm. The enforced idleness was foreign to Yates, who typically rose before dawn and worked until dusk. He found himself restless, moving from window to window, checking the condition of the sky, the depth of the snow. "You're like a caged mountain lion," Catherine observed from her seat by the fire, where she had been engaged in conversation with Miss Brown. Yates paused, realizing he had indeed been pacing. "I'm not accustomed to sitting still," he admitted. "Perhaps a game might help pass the time," Gertrude suggested, appearing with a tray of coffee. "I have checkers and a deck of cards in the parlor cabinet." The suggestion was met with enthusiasm, particularly from Porter, who claimed to be an undefeated checkers champion. The afternoon passed pleasantly enough with games and conversation, though Yates noted that Catherine grew quieter as the day wore on, her gaze drifting frequently to the windows, where snow continued to accumulate. When they found themselves alone for a moment in the hallway, Yates asked quietly, "Are you all right? You seem troubled." Catherine glanced up, surprise flickering across her features. "I'm fine, just thinking about what lies ahead." She hesitated, then added, It's a strange feeling being so close to my new home yet unable to see it. It's strange for me too, Yates confessed. Having you here but not being able to show you the ranch, introduce you properly to your new life. Tell me more about it, she said suddenly. The house you mentioned, it has 4 bedrooms. Yes, Yates nodded, leaning against the wall as he gathered his thoughts. It's not fancy, mind you, built it myself with help from my hands. 2 stories with a wide porch that wraps around 3 sides. Downstairs has the kitchen, a dining room and a sitting room with a stone fireplace. Upstairs are the bedrooms, the master at the back with windows facing east so you can see the sunrise, and 3 smaller rooms. One I use as an office for ranch business. Catherine listened intently, and Yates found himself elaborating on details he hadn't mentioned in his letters: the cherry wood dining table he'd commissioned from a craftsman in St. Louis, the braided rug before the fireplace, the small library of books he'd accumulated over the years. "It sounds lovely," she said when he finished. "Different from what I'm accustomed to, certainly, but peaceful." "It is that," Yates agreed, "especially in the evenings when the work is done and the land quiets down. Sometimes I sit on the porch and just listen to the night sounds: crickets, the occasional owl, the horses moving in the corral." A wistful smile touched her lips. "I think I'd like that." They rejoined the others in the parlor, where Porter was regaling Gertrude and Miss Brown with a tale of his travels through Indian Territory. The day slipped into evening, and after another simple but hearty meal, they all retired early, lulled by the persistent drone of the wind and the warmth of the fires Gertrude kept blazing in every room. In their shared room, Catherine and Yates fell into an easier routine than the previous night, the initial awkwardness softened by their day spent in each other's company. As Catherine sat on the edge of the bed brushing out her long hair, Yates found his gaze drawn repeatedly to the rhythmic motion and the way the firelight caught the auburn strands. "My mother had hair like yours," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. "Same color, same waves." "I'd almost forgotten until now." Catherine paused in her brushing, her expression softening. "Tell me about her." Yates settled onto the divan, surprising himself with his willingness to speak of memories he rarely revisited. "She was gentle but strong. Came west with my father when they were first married, helped him build their farm from nothing. She loved music, would sing while she worked, everything from hymns to folk songs she learned as a girl. She taught me to play the harmonica." "You play?" Catherine asked, genuine interest in her voice. "Used to, haven't picked one up in years." He paused, remembering. "After she died, my father didn't want music in the house anymore, said it reminded him too much of her." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. "Loss changes people. My father was never quite the same after my mother died. More dedicated to his work, perhaps, but less present, somehow." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, each lost in memories of parents long gone. Then Catherine resumed brushing her hair, and Yates found himself sharing more stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the Army, his early struggles establishing the ranch. In turn, Catherine spoke of her life in Boston, her father's medical practice, the books she had loved as a girl, her brief experience teaching at a small dame school before her father's illness required her full attention. "I enjoy teaching," she admitted. "Though I was not formally trained like Miss Brown. My father believed in education for women, which was somewhat unusual in his circle. We've a schoolhouse in Clifton Hill," Yates told her. "Small, with just one teacher for all ages. Miss Abigail Foster's been teaching there for 20 years, but she's getting on in years now." Catherine's eyes brightened with interest. "Perhaps I might assist her sometimes, when things are settled at the ranch." I don't see why not, Yates agreed, pleased by her enthusiasm. Though the ride to town is long, especially in winter. They talked late into the night again, the storm providing a cocoon of isolation that seemed to encourage confidences. When they finally bid each other good night, Yates felt a growing certainty that Catherine O'Malley, with her quiet strength and keen mind, might indeed be the perfect partner for the life he had built. The second morning of the blizzard dawned with a subtle change in the quality of light filtering through the frost-covered windows. The wind had lessened somewhat, though snow still fell steadily from a leaden sky. At breakfast, Porter announced his intention to attempt the journey to Jefferson City as soon as the roads were passable. "Can't afford to be stranded much longer," he explained, attacking his flapjacks with enthusiasm. "Got appointments to keep, orders to fill." "The roads won't be cleared for days yet," Yates cautioned. Even with the wind dying down, Porter waved a dismissive hand. "I've traveled in worse. Once the snow stops falling, I'll be on my way." The day passed much like the previous one, with games of checkers and cards, shared meals and conversation by the fire. Yates noticed Catherine engaged Miss Brown in a lengthy discussion about education in the territory, asking detailed questions about curriculum and teaching methods. Her genuine interest was evident, and Yates found himself imagining her perhaps one day taking over from the aging Miss Foster at the Clifton Hill schoolhouse. By late afternoon, the snowfall had finally ceased, though the sky remained heavy with the promise of more to come. Yates stood on the covered porch, assessing the transformed landscape of Clifton Hill. The main street was completely buried, with only the tops of hitching posts visible above the drifts. The buildings across the way were half concealed by snow, their windows dark except for the occasional glow of lamplight. The sound of the door opening behind him drew his attention. Catherine stepped out, wrapped in her heavy coat, a woolen scarf protecting her head and neck. "Gertrude said the worst might be over," she said, coming to stand beside him. "For now," Yates agreed, "but there's more coming. I can feel it in the air." They stood in silence, watching as a few brave souls emerged from nearby buildings, beginning the arduous task of clearing paths through the snow. Men with shovels attacked the drifts, carving narrow channels between buildings, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "How long do you think before we can travel to the ranch?" Catherine asked, her voice carrying a note of eagerness that warmed him despite the cold. "If no more snow falls, perhaps tomorrow," Yates replied. "Though the road will be difficult, it might be another day beyond that." Catherine nodded, her gaze fixed on the activity below. "I find I'm impatient to see it," she admitted, "to begin our life there." The simple statement, spoken without artifice, affected Yates deeply. "As am I," he said quietly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgment of the strange circumstances that had thrown them together, and the unexpected connection that had formed as a result. Catherine's cheeks were pink from the cold, her blue eyes bright against the winter landscape, and Yates was suddenly struck by an overwhelming urge to kiss her. The moment was broken by Porter's boisterous voice as he joined them on the porch, announcing that he had secured a sleigh and driver for the following morning to take him to the railroad junction 6 miles south, where he hoped to catch a train to Jefferson City. "You're welcome to join me if you'd like," he offered generously. "The driver says his sleigh can accommodate 4 passengers." Yates exchanged a glance with Catherine. "Our ranch is in the opposite direction," he explained, "but I appreciate the offer." "Suit yourself," Porter shrugged. "Though if this weather turns again, you might be stuck here for another week." The thought was not entirely unpleasant to Yates, who had found an unexpected contentment in these days of enforced idleness with Catherine. Still, he was a man of action by nature, and the desire to return to his ranch to show Catherine her new home was growing stronger by the hour. That evening after dinner, as they all sat around the fire in the parlor, Gertrude brought out a battered old guitar. "My late husband used to play," she explained, offering it to the group. "Anyone care to provide some entertainment?" To Yates's surprise, Catherine reached for the instrument. "I know a few songs," she said with a small smile, "though I'm far from accomplished." She settled the guitar on her lap, taking a moment to tune it, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the strings. Then she began to play a simple melody, her voice joining the notes in a clear, sweet soprano. "Shenandoah, I long to hear you look away. You rolling river Shenandoah, I long to hear you away. We're bound away across the wide Missouri." The beauty of her voice caught Yates off guard, stirring memories of his mother singing this very song as she worked in their Pennsylvania kitchen. He watched, transfixed, as Catherine continued through several verses, her eyes half closed in concentration, her fingers confidently finding the chords. When she finished, there was a moment of appreciative silence before the small audience broke into applause. "My goodness, dear, you've been holding out on us," Gertrude declared. "What a lovely voice," Catherine blushed, setting the guitar aside. "My mother taught me. She believed every young lady should have some musical accomplishment." "You know Barbara Allen?" Miss Brown asked eagerly. Catherine nodded and took up the guitar again, launching into the old ballad with the same sweet clarity. She played several more songs at the group's request, each one showcasing her natural musicality. Yates watched her throughout, seeing yet another facet of the woman he had agreed to marry. With each passing hour, Catherine O'Malley revealed new depths, new talents, new aspects of her character that both intrigued and impressed him. The letters they had exchanged, while honest, had barely scratched the surface of who she truly was. Later, as they prepared for bed in their room, Yates found himself thinking of her music, of the unexpected pleasure of discovering she could sing and play. "You never mentioned your musical abilities in your letters," he said as she sat at the small vanity, unpinning her hair. Catherine met his eyes in the mirror. "You never asked," she replied with a hint of teasing in her voice. "Besides, I wasn't sure if such things would matter on a cattle ranch in Missouri." "Music matters everywhere," Yates said quietly, "and it's been too long since there was any at my home." She turned to face him directly, her expression softening. "Then I shall be sure to bring it with me." In that moment, looking at her in the warm glow of the lamplight, Yates felt the last of his reservations melt away. Catherine O'Malley might have come to him as a stranger, chosen through letters and photographs, but in these 3 days of snowbound proximity, she had become something more, a companion whose presence he already found essential. "I have something for you," he said suddenly, moving to retrieve his coat from the hook by the door. From an inner pocket, he withdrew a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. "I had intended to give this to you when we reached the ranch, but perhaps now is a better time." Catherine accepted the package with curious eyes. "What is it?" "Open it and see," he encouraged, suddenly nervous about her reaction. She carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a wooden box, its lid carved with a simple design of prairie flowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a ring, a band of gold set with a single, modest diamond. "It was my mother's," Yates explained as Catherine stared at the ring in silence. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should give it to my wife when the time came. If it's not to your liking, we can find another in Jefferson City next time we're there." "No," Catherine said quickly, looking up at him with shining eyes. "It's beautiful and all the more precious for having belonged to your mother." She hesitated, then asked softly, "Are you certain you wish to give it to me now? We've only just met, and our arrangement was for marriage," Yates said firmly. "And these past days have only confirmed for me that you're the woman I want as my wife. Unless," he added with sudden uncertainty, "you've had second thoughts." "No," she assured him, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. "No second thoughts. I just wanted to be sure you were certain." "I am," Yates said, and was surprised to realize how completely he meant it. He took the ring from the box and, taking her left hand in his, slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Catherine O'Malley, will you marry me?" "Not because of our arrangement or the circumstances that brought us together, but because I believe we could build a good life together." Catherine looked from the ring to his face, her blue eyes luminous in the lamplight. "Yes, Yates Montgomery, I will marry you, because I believe the same." The simplicity of the moment, the quiet exchange of promises in the small room above Gertrude Miller's parlor, seemed more meaningful than any elaborate ceremony could have been. Yates lifted Catherine's hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, just above where his mother's ring now rested. "When we return to the ranch," he said, "we'll ride into town and speak to Reverend Adams about making it official. Unless you'd prefer to wait, have a proper ceremony with a dress and guests." Catherine shook her head. "I have no family to attend, no friends here yet." "A simple ceremony will suffice." She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Besides, Mrs. Miller might be scandalized if she knew we weren't yet married." Yates laughed, the sound surprising even himself. It had been a long time since he had laughed freely without reservation. "Gertrude's seen far worse in her years running this boarding house, I assure you." They stayed up late again that night, talking of the future, making plans for the ranch, for their life together. Catherine spoke of gardens she hoped to plant, of books she wanted to order from St. Louis, of her desire to learn to ride properly, so she could accompany Yates on his daily rounds of the property. Yates found himself sharing dreams he had barely acknowledged even to himself, expanding the horse breeding operation, adding an orchard on the south slope near the creek, perhaps even building a proper library addition to the house one day. "My father had a magnificent library," Catherine said wistfully. "Over 1,000 volumes. I had to sell most of them to pay his debts, but I kept a few favorites." She glanced at her carpetbag. "They're in there, actually. I couldn't bear to leave them behind." "What did you keep?" Yates asked, genuinely curious. "Shakespeare's collected works, Austen's Pride and Prejudice, Thoreau's Walden, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry, and my father's medical reference books." She smiled a little self-consciously. "Not very practical choices for starting a new life, I suppose." "Books are always practical," Yates countered. "Especially during long winter evenings when there's nothing to do but sit by the fire and read." The conversation drifted to other topics: Catherine's hopes of perhaps starting a small school at the ranch for the children of his hands and neighboring ranchers; Yates's plans for breeding a line of horses, specifically suited to the challenging terrain of central Missouri. When they finally bid each other good night, there was a new ease between them, a sense of partnership forming that transcended their original agreement. The ring on Catherine's finger caught the last flicker of lamplight as she turned to her bed, a tangible symbol of promises made and a future now shared. Morning brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine that turned the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling sea of white. By breakfast, the entire town of Clifton Hill was digging out, with men and boys clearing paths along the main street and freeing doors and windows from the encroaching drifts. Porter departed as planned, bundled into a sleigh bound for the railroad junction with many good wishes from Gertrude and promises to call on them all, when next his sales route brought him through Clifton Hill. Miss Brown announced her intention to remain at the boarding house another day, as the road to Jefferson City was reportedly still treacherous. Yates spent the morning inquiring about transport to his ranch. The town's livery stable owner, Silas Jenkins, offered the use of a sturdy sleigh and team of draft horses for the journey. "Roads ain't cleared past the town limits," Jenkins warned as Yates inspected the conveyance. "You'll be breaking trail most of the way. Might take twice as long as usual even with this team." "We'll manage," Yates assured him, checking the runners and harness with practiced eyes. "I know the way blind if need be." Jenkins nodded, acknowledging Yates's experience. "Heard you got yourself a mail-order bride," he commented casually. "Arrived during the worst of it, they're saying." "News travels fast," Yates observed dryly. "Small town," Jenkins shrugged. "Especially when we're all snowbound together. She holding up all right. City gal like that can't be what she expected." "She's doing just fine," Yates said, a note of pride in his voice. "More than fine. She's a remarkable woman." Jenkins raised an eyebrow at Yates's tone. "Well now, sounds like you got lucky in the mail-order lottery. Good for you, Montgomery. About time you had something besides that ranch to care about." Yates merely nodded, unwilling to discuss his personal affairs further. "We'll need the sleigh after lunch. That work for you?" "It'll be ready," Jenkins promised. "I'll have the boys feed and water the team before then." Back at the boarding house, Yates found Catherine in the parlor with Gertrude, examining a quilt the older woman had made. Catherine looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with a smile that sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "Yates, Gertrude has been showing me her quilting. Isn't this pattern magnificent?" She gestured to the intricate design of stars and flowers spread across her lap. "Very fine," Yates agreed, though his attention was more on Catherine's animated expression than on the quilt itself. "I've arranged for a sleigh to take us to the ranch after lunch. If you're ready to travel." "Yes, absolutely," Catherine said eagerly, carefully folding the quilt and returning it to Gertrude. "I'll need to pack my things." "No rush," Gertrude assured her, patting her hand affectionately. "Though I must say I'll miss having you both here. You've brightened up these snowbound days considerably." "We'll visit when next we're in town," Catherine promised. "And perhaps you'll come to the ranch sometime when the weather is better." "I'd like that," Gertrude smiled, clearly touched by the invitation. "Now let me go see about putting together some food for your journey. Can't have you traveling all that way without provisions." When Gertrude had bustled off to the kitchen, Catherine turned to Yates, her eyes shining with excitement. "Is it really safe to travel?" "The roads must still be treacherous." "It won't be easy," Yates acknowledged. "But Jenkins is providing his best team and a sturdy sleigh. We'll take it slow and be home before dark." "Home," Catherine repeated softly, testing the word. "It still feels strange to say it about a place I've never seen." Yates stepped closer, taking her hands in his. They were warm and surprisingly strong, the hands of a woman accustomed to work despite her gentle upbringing. "It will be your home," he assured her, "in every sense of the word." Their eyes met, and for a moment the rest of the world seemed to fade away. Yates was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the slight flush in Catherine's cheeks, of how easy it would be to lean down and kiss her. The spell was broken by Miss Brown's entrance into the parlor, her arms full of books she had apparently borrowed from somewhere in town. Catherine stepped back, her hands slipping from Yates's, but the moment lingered between them like a promise. After a hearty lunch of beef stew and fresh bread, they prepared to depart. Gertrude insisted on packing them a basket of food-cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apple tarts, just in case the journey takes longer than expected. She also provided extra blankets and heated bricks wrapped in flannel to place at their feet in the sleigh. The sleigh arrived promptly, Jenkins's eldest son handling the reins of the powerful draft horses. Their luggage was loaded, goodbyes were said, and then Catherine was settled among the blankets, with Yates beside her and the heated bricks providing welcome warmth at their feet. As they pulled away from the boarding house, Catherine turned to wave at Gertrude and Miss Brown, who stood on the porch watching their departure. "They were so kind," she said, adjusting her scarf against the cold. "I hadn't expected such a warm welcome." "Folks around here are generally neighborly," Yates told her, keeping a watchful eye on the road ahead as the sleigh maneuvered through the cleared path down the main street. "Once they know you belong." The town quickly fell behind them as they passed the last buildings and headed out into the open countryside. Here, no paths had been cleared, and the going immediately became more difficult. The horses strained against the deep snow, the sleigh runners cutting fresh tracks through the pristine white landscape. Catherine gazed out at the transformed world with wonder. The afternoon sun made the snow sparkle like diamonds, and the few trees dotting the rolling hills were encased in ice that glittered with rainbow hues when the light caught them just right. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her words forming clouds in the frigid air. Like something from a fairy tale. Yates followed her gaze, seeing the familiar landscape through new eyes. "Wait until you see the ranch," he said. "The hills behind the house with the sun setting over them. There's nothing quite like it." They traveled in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the creak of the sleigh runners and the rhythmic breathing of the horses. Occasionally, Yates would point out landmarks most invisible beneath the snow, but familiar to him from years of traversing this route. "Carpenter's Creek runs through there, under that rise," he would say, "or the Marshall property begins just beyond that stand of oak trees." Catherine listened attentively, trying to build a mental map of her new home territory. She asked questions about neighboring ranches, about the wildlife in the area, about the seasonal changes in the landscape. "Spring comes suddenly here," Yates told her. "One day it's winter, and the next, the prairie is exploding with wildflowers. Blue and purple and yellow as far as the eye can see." "I look forward to seeing it," Catherine said, her voice warm despite the cold air around them. The journey took longer than usual, as Jenkins had predicted. The horses had to break trail through snow that sometimes reached their chests, and twice they had to stop to rest the team. During these breaks, Yates would climb down to check the horses while Catherine remained bundled in the sleigh, sipping hot coffee from the flask Gertrude had provided. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Yates finally pointed ahead to a distant cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. "There," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "That's the ranch." Catherine leaned forward eagerly, trying to make out details through the gathering dusk. "It looks larger than I imagined," she admitted. "The main house is in the center," Yates explained, urging the tired horses forward with renewed purpose. "The building to the left is the barn, and beyond that, the bunkhouse where the hands live. On the right is the storage shed and smokehouse." As they drew closer, more details emerged. The main house was indeed impressive, a two-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around three sides, just as Yates had described. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that someone had kept the fire going in their absence. Lights appeared in the windows as they approached, and by the time the sleigh drew up before the house, the front door had opened, spilling warm light onto the snow-covered porch. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, a tall, lanky man who raised a hand in greeting. "That's Emmett Turner, my foreman," Yates said as he brought the sleigh to a halt. Been with me since the beginning." No sooner had the sleigh stopped than Emmett was striding through the snow to meet them, followed by 3 other men who emerged from the direction of the bunkhouse. "About time you showed up," Emmett called, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "Was beginning to think you'd eloped to St. Louis or some such foolishness." "Got caught in the blizzard," Yates replied, climbing down from the sleigh and turning to assist Catherine. "Emmett, this is Miss Catherine O'Malley." "Catherine, my foreman, Emmett Turner." Emmett removed his hat, revealing a shock of gray, streaked brown hair. "Madam," he said respectfully, "welcome to Montgomery Ranch. We've been looking forward to your arrival." "Thank you, Mr. Turner," Catherine replied warmly. "I'm very pleased to meet you." The other 3 men approached more cautiously, each removing their hats as Yates introduced them. Daniel Cooper, the youngest at just 23, who handled most of the horse training. Marcus Whitaker, a taciturn former buffalo hunter who now served as the ranch's primary cattleman. And Josiah Riley, a middle-aged widower who managed the vegetable garden and cared for the smaller livestock. "The men have kept things running smoothly in my absence," Yates explained to Catherine as they moved toward the house, the hands following with their luggage. "No ranch can function without good help, and these are the best." "You're too kind, boss," Emmett drawled. "We just did what needed doing. Got the stock through the blizzard without losing a single head, though it was touch and go with some of the younger calves." They reached the porch, and Yates paused, turning to Catherine. "Welcome home," he said quietly, gesturing for her to precede him through the door. Catherine took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold, entering the house that was to be her home. The front door opened directly into a spacious sitting room dominated by a large stone fireplace, where a fire blazed welcomingly. Simple but sturdy furniture was arranged comfortably around the hearth, a sofa upholstered in worn leather, 2 armchairs, a low table of polished oak. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with a surprising number of volumes. A doorway to the right led to what appeared to be a dining room, and beyond that, Catherine could glimpse the kitchen. A wide staircase rose along the left wall, leading to the second floor. Mrs. Riley, Josiah's sister-in-law, comes in twice a week to clean and do laundry, Yates explained as Catherine took in her surroundings. "She was here yesterday and got the house ready. There's fresh linens on the beds and food in the pantry." Catherine turned to him, overwhelmed by the reality of finally being here in this house with this man who was to be her husband. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely. "Exactly as you described it." Emmett cleared his throat. "Well, we'll leave you folks to get settled. Miss O'Malley must be tired after the journey." "Actually," Catherine said before Emmett could depart, "I was hoping Mr. Montgomery might show me around the house first. I'm eager to see all of it." Yates smiled at her enthusiasm. "Of course. Emmett, could you see to the horses?" "They've had a hard day." "Already on it," the foreman assured him. "Cooper, Whitaker, you help with the team. Riley, get those provisions inside, then we'll all head back to the bunkhouse." The men dispersed to their tasks, and Yates turned to Catherine. "Would you like to remove your coat before the tour? It's warm enough in here." Catherine nodded, allowing him to help her out of her heavy outer garments. As she straightened her dress and smoothed her hair, she became acutely aware that they were alone together for the first time in their own home. The thought sent a flutter of nervous anticipation through her. "Shall we start down here and work our way up?" Yates suggested, seemingly oblivious to her sudden attack of nerves. The tour was comprehensive, with Yates explaining the history and function of each room. The sitting room, he told her, had been the first part of the house completed, followed by the kitchen and a small bedroom that now served as his office. The second story had been added 3 years later, once the ranch was turning a profit. The kitchen was larger than Catherine had expected, with a massive cast iron stove, ample counter space, and a pantry well stocked with preserved foods and staples. The dining room held the cherry wood table Yates had mentioned, surrounded by 8 matching chairs, for when the hands join us for holiday meals, he explained. Upstairs, there were indeed 4 bedrooms, the master bedroom at the back of the house, with windows facing east as promised, a slightly smaller room across the hall that Yates suggested could be Catherine's if she preferred her own space, and 2 additional bedrooms, one currently serving as Yates's office, the other simply furnished as a guest room. "I don't often have visitors," Yates admitted as they looked into the spare room. "Occasionally a cattle buyer from St. Louis or a horse trader passing through." They ended in the master bedroom, a spacious chamber dominated by a large 4-poster bed covered with a patchwork quilt in shades of blue and green. A dresser, washstand, and wardrobe completed the simple furnishings, while a braided rug in matching colors covered much of the plank floor. "This is my room," Yates said, somewhat awkwardly. "But of course it's yours now too if you— that is, unless you'd prefer the room across the hall at least until we're properly married." Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "I think it would be best if I take the other room for now," she said gently, "just until the ceremony." Yates nodded, looking relieved that she had made the decision. "Of course, I'll have your things brought up to that room." As they headed back downstairs, Catherine trailing her hand along the smooth wooden banister, she felt a growing sense of rightness. The house was solid and practical, like the man who had built it, but it also held touches of beauty and comfort that spoke to his character beneath the rugged exterior. They found that Riley had indeed brought in the provisions and stoked the fires in both the sitting room and kitchen before departing. The house was warm and inviting, filled with the subtle sense of wood smoke and beeswax polish. "Are you hungry?" Yates asked as they stood somewhat uncertainly in the sitting room. "I can prepare something simple." "You cook?" Catherine asked, surprised. A smile tugged at the corner of Yates's mouth. "I've lived alone for 15 years, Catherine. I had to learn or starve. Though I won't claim any great skill at it." "Let me," she offered. "I'd like to begin as I mean to go on, and the kitchen is my domain now, isn't it?" "It is," Yates agreed, his expression softening. "Everything here is yours now to arrange or change as you see fit." Catherine headed to the kitchen, grateful for the chance to be useful, to begin establishing her place in this new home. She found the larder well stocked indeed, with eggs, butter, flour, and even some fresh vegetables that must have been stored in the root cellar beneath the house. She set about preparing a simple meal of bacon, eggs, and biscuits breakfast for dinner, a treat her father had always enjoyed. Yates hovered nearby at first, offering to help, but she shooed him away with a smile. "Go sit by the fire," she told him. "You've been driving through snow all day. Rest while I work." He obeyed, though she noticed him watching her from the doorway more than once, a thoughtful expression on his face. By the time she called him to the table, night had fallen completely outside, and the windows reflected only their own domestic scene, a man and woman about to share their first meal in their home. They ate at the kitchen table rather than in the formal dining room, the space between them filled with comfortable conversation about the ranch, the animals, the hands, and their various responsibilities. Yates praised her cooking enthusiastically, and Catherine found herself pleased by his appreciation of even such a simple meal. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room, where Yates added another log to the fire before settling into one of the armchairs. Catherine took the other, feeling a pleasant weariness creeping over her after the long day of travel. I thought we might ride into town the day after tomorrow, if the weather holds, Yates said, watching the flames dance. Speak to Reverend Adams about the ceremony. That sounds perfect, Catherine agreed. I'd like a day to become familiar with the house first, to learn where everything is kept. Yates nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've been thinking, he said after a moment, about our arrangement. Catherine's heart skipped a beat, sudden anxiety flooding her. Yes, when I placed that advertisement, he continued, his eyes still on the fire, I was looking for a practical partnership, someone to keep house, share the work, perhaps bear children someday. He paused, then finally looked at her directly. I never expected to feel more. The simple admission hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Catherine felt her breath catch in her throat. I've come to care for you, Catherine, Yates said quietly. More than I thought possible in such a short time. And I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you that you're not ready to give. If you need time to develop feelings, or if you never do, Yates, Catherine interrupted gently, leaning forward in her chair. I feel it too. His eyes widened slightly, hope flickering across his features. You do, these past days, she explained. Being snowbound together, talking, learning about each other, they've changed things for me as well. I agreed to this marriage as a practical solution to both our situations, but now. She smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. Now I find myself looking forward to it for entirely different reasons. The relief and joy that transformed Yates's face made Catherine's heart swell. He rose from his chair and crossed to her, kneeling before her and taking her hands in his. I want to do this properly, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Catherine O'Malley, I'm asking you to marry me not because of our arrangement, but because these past days have shown me the kind of woman you are: strong, intelligent, kind, and brave. I believe we could build not just a partnership, but a marriage based on genuine affection and respect. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the sincerity in his face and voice. And I accept for those same reasons, she answered softly. Because I've seen the man you are, Yates Montgomery, honorable, hardworking, thoughtful, and far gentler than you first appear. Yates raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The tenderness of the gesture brought a flush to Catherine's cheeks and a flutter to her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness. It's getting late, he said after a moment, releasing her hands reluctantly. You must be tired after the journey. Catherine nodded, though she was reluctant for this moment to end. Yes, I suppose I am. Yates stood, offering his hand to help her from the chair. I'll show you to your room and bring up your carpet bag. They ascended the stairs together, a comfortable silence between them. At the door to what would be her temporary bedroom, Yates paused. I'll get your things, he said, and disappeared down the stairs, returning moments later with her carpet bag. Thank you, Catherine said, accepting it from him. They stood facing each other in the hallway, neither quite ready to say goodnight. Tomorrow I'll show you the rest of the ranch, Yates promised. The barn, the corrals, introduce you properly to the horses. I'd like that, Catherine smiled. Good night, Yates. Good night, Catherine. He hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Sleep well. As Catherine closed the door behind her and prepared for bed in the unfamiliar room, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey that had begun with a desperate decision in a Boston townhouse had led her here, to this ranch in Missouri, to a man who looked at her with warmth and respect in his eyes. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and she harbored no illusions that ranch life would be easy, Catherine knew with growing certainty that she had found where she belonged. Catherine woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains of her bedroom window. For a moment, she lay disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling above her and the distant sounds of activity outside confusing her sleep-fogged mind. Then memory flooded back the journey by sleigh, the arrival at the ranch, the quiet evening with Yates by the fire. She sat up, pushing back the heavy quilts and shivering slightly in the cool morning air. Through the window, she could see a landscape transformed by snow and sunshine, the white expanse broken only by the outbuildings of the ranch and, in the distance, a line of trees marking what must be the creek Yates had mentioned. Dressing quickly in one of her sturdier dresses, a dark green wool that would be practical for ranch life, Catherine pinned her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck and made her way downstairs. The delicious aroma of coffee and something baking led her to the kitchen, where she found Yates at the stove, his back to her as he attended to a pan of what appeared to be cornbread. "Good morning," she said, announcing her presence. Yates turned, a smile lighting his face at the sight of her. "Good morning. I hope I didn't wake you with my clattering about down here." "Not at all," Catherine assured him, moving to the stove to peer at his handiwork. "That smells wonderful. Just cornbread," Yates said with a touch of self-deprecation. "And bacon." "Not much of a welcome breakfast, I'm afraid." "It's perfect," Catherine insisted, taking the coffee cup he offered her. The brew was strong and hot, exactly what she needed to fully wake up. "I see you're an early riser." "Force of habit," Yates nodded. "Been up since dawn, checking on the stock with Emmett. The blizzard didn't do as much damage as it might if we only lost 2 calves, which is something of a miracle." "I'm sorry for the loss," Catherine said sincerely, "but glad it wasn't worse." They ate breakfast at the kitchen table again, the morning sunlight pouring through the windows and turning the simple room golden. Catherine found herself studying Yates in this light, the way his dark hair, in need of a trim, curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the fan of lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun, the strength in his hands as they broke apart a piece of cornbread. "What will you do today?" she asked, pouring them both more coffee. "Check the north pasture with Marcus, see how the herd there weathered the storm," Yates replied. "Then I promised to help Daniel with a new mare he's training. She's skittish, and he thinks she might respond better to a different hand." He paused, looking slightly uncertain. "Unless you'd prefer I stay close to the house, help you get settled." "No," Catherine shook her head. "I think I'd like the day to explore on my own, learn the house properly. Though perhaps you could show me around the immediate grounds before you go, so I know where everything is." Yates looked relieved. "Of course. And Emmett's wife, Sarah, will be over mid-morning. She lives in town normally, but comes out to the ranch a few days each week to help with cooking for the hands. She's eager to meet you." After breakfast, Yates gave Catherine a tour of the ranch buildings, the massive barn with its stalls for horses and milking area for the small dairy herd, the bunkhouse where the hands lived, a simple but comfortable structure with a common area and 4 private sleeping quarters, the smokehouse and storage sheds, and the chicken coop, currently housing a dozen fat hens and a strutting rooster. "The garden's there," Yates said, pointing to a snow-covered area enclosed by a sturdy fence. "Riley keeps it up in the growing season, vegetables mostly, some herbs. And over there, behind the house, there's an apple orchard, just 6 trees now, but I've been meaning to plant more." Catherine tried to imagine it all in spring and summer, the garden lush with vegetables, the orchard in bloom, the land around them green instead of white. It seemed like a different world from the snow-covered expanse before her now. "It's all so vast," she commented as they stood on the back porch, looking out over the property. "How many acres did you say?" "Nearly 1,000 now," Yates replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Started with just 10, added more as I could afford it." The best grazing land is to the north, where the creek provides water year-round. To the east, there's good timber oak mostly, some maple. South and west is open prairie, perfect for the horses. Catherine glanced up at him, struck by the quiet passion in his voice when he spoke of his land. This ranch was not just his livelihood but his life's work, the physical manifestation of years of labor and dreams. And now he was inviting her to be part of it. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you for showing me." Yates looked down at her, his expression warm. "Thank you for coming all this way, for being willing to make this your home." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions. Then a call from the direction of the barn Emmett, letting Yates know they were ready to ride out, broke the spell. "I should go," Yates said reluctantly. "We'll be back by mid-afternoon. If you need anything, Riley will be around the outbuildings most of the day." "I'll be fine," Catherine assured him. "Go, see to your ranch." Yates hesitated, then leaned down and placed a quick, gentle kiss on her cheek. "Until later, then," he murmured, and strode off toward the barn, leaving Catherine touching her cheek where the warmth of his lips lingered. The morning passed quickly as Catherine familiarized herself with the house. She explored the pantry and kitchen cabinets, taking inventory of supplies and making notes of items they might need from town. She examined the linen closet, counted sheets and towels, and discovered a trunk in the spare bedroom filled with quilts in various stages of completion, evidence that some previous occupant of the house had been a quilter. Around 10 o'clock, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Sarah Turner, Emmett's wife. She was a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, with graying brown hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "Miss O'Malley." "So wonderful to finally meet you," she exclaimed, enveloping Catherine in a warm embrace before she could even respond to the greeting. "Emmett told me all about your arrival. Imagine, coming all the way from Boston in the middle of a blizzard. You must be made of stern stuff indeed." Catherine laughed, immediately warming to the older woman's forthright manner. "Please, call me Catherine, and I'm not sure it was sternness so much as stubborn adherence to a schedule." Sarah bustled into the kitchen, setting down a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I've brought some fresh bread and preserves," she explained, unpacking the items. "And I thought I might prepare a proper welcome dinner for tonight, if you don't mind my taking over your kitchen for a bit." "Not at all," Catherine assured her. "In fact, I'd welcome the chance to learn from you. I'm a fair cook with simple meals, but I suspect ranch cooking may require some different skills." Sarah beamed at her. "Oh, we'll get along splendidly, I can tell. Now let's see what we have to work with." The two women spent the morning in the kitchen, with Sarah showing Catherine where various staples were stored and explaining the rhythm of meals on the ranch: large breakfasts before dawn, a midday meal that the hands often took in the field during busy seasons, and hearty suppers when the day's work was done. "The hands take most of their meals at the bunkhouse," Sarah explained as she expertly prepared a venison roast for the evening meal. "I cook for them 3 days a week: Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. The rest of the time, they fend for themselves, though Josiah's a decent cook in a pinch." "And you live in town?" Catherine asked, slicing potatoes as directed. "Most of the time, yes. We have a small house on Elm Street. Emmett rides in when he can, usually Saturday nights and Sundays." She paused in her work, giving Catherine a thoughtful look. "It can be lonely out here, especially in winter when the roads are bad. That's partly why Yates wanted a wife, I expect. 15 years is a long time to be alone." Catherine nodded, understanding the unspoken question in Sarah's words. "I'm not afraid of solitude," she said quietly. "In fact, after the crowding of Boston, I think I might welcome a little peace and quiet." Sarah smiled approvingly. You'll do just fine then. And you won't lack for company entirely. There's church socials in town monthly and neighbors do visit, especially in good weather. The Montgomery Ranch is well respected hereabouts. The conversation flowed easily between them as they worked, with Sarah sharing stories about the town and its inhabitants, painting a picture of the community Catherine was joining. There was Reverend Adams, the young minister with progressive ideas who had come to Clifton Hill just 3 years ago, Mayor Thompson and his socially ambitious wife, Dr. Gardner, the town physician who would welcome Catherine's medical knowledge, and a host of other characters who made up the fabric of life in this corner of Missouri. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen was filled with delicious aromas, and Catherine had learned more about her new home than she could have from any guidebook. Sarah had proven to be not just a talented cook, but a natural storyteller and, Catherine suspected, a potential friend. "There they are now," Sarah said, glancing out the window at the sound of approaching horses. "Right on time for once." Catherine joined her at the window, watching as Yates, Emmett, and Marcus rode into the yard, their horses leaving tracks in the pristine snow. The men dismounted at the barn, and Catherine felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the sight of Yates, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. "Go on," Sarah urged with a knowing smile. "Go greet your man. I'll finish up here." Catherine hesitated only briefly before grabbing her shawl and stepping outside onto the porch. The afternoon air was crisp, but not bitterly cold, the sunshine providing a measure of warmth despite the snow covering everything in sight. Yates spotted her as he emerged from the barn and changed direction, heading toward the house with long strides. His face, reddened from the cold, broke into a smile that transformed his normally serious expression. "Hello," he called as he neared the porch. "How was your day?" "Productive," Catherine replied, returning his smile. "Sarah has been teaching me the secrets of ranch cooking, among other things." "Has she now?" Yates climbed the steps to join her on the porch. "Should I be worried about what else she might have told you?" "Nothing too incriminating," Catherine assured him with a teasing lilt to her voice. Though she did mention something about a church picnic last summer and a pie-eating contest, Yates groaned, shaking his head. "I was goaded into it by Riley's nephews. Those boys could talk a saint into sin." Catherine laughed, delighted by this glimpse of a less serious side to her future husband. "Sarah says you won." "At a considerable cost to my dignity," Yates admitted ruefully, "and my best shirt." He paused, studying her face. "You look happy." "I am," Catherine said, realizing as she spoke that it was entirely true. Despite the strangeness of her surroundings, despite the enormous changes in her life, she felt a contentment here that had been missing for a long time. "How was the north pasture?" "Better than expected," Yates replied. "The cattle found shelter in the lee of the ridge, and the snow actually insulated them from the worst of the cold. We only found one more casualty, an older cow that was already weakening before the storm." Catherine nodded, understanding the practicalities of ranch life. Death was part of the natural order, especially in a place where nature's power was so evident. "Sarah's preparing quite a feast for dinner," she told him, changing the subject. "A proper welcome," she called it. "She's been threatening that since I told them about your imminent arrival," Yates said with a smile. "Sarah loves any excuse to cook for an audience larger than Emmett." They stood together on the porch for a moment longer, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. Then Yates offered his arm. "Shall we go in? I should clean up before dinner." Catherine placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath layers of wool and leather. "Yes, let's go in. It's our home, after all." The simple statement seemed to please Yates immensely, and his hand briefly covered hers where it rested on his arm, a gesture of acknowledgement and appreciation that needed no words. Dinner that evening was indeed a feast, the venison roast surrounded by roasted potatoes and carrots, fresh bread still warm from the oven, preserved peaches from last summer's harvest, and an apple pie that filled the kitchen with the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg. Emmett and Sarah joined them at the table, along with Marcus, Daniel, and Josiah, making for a lively meal. The conversation flowed freely, with the men discussing the state of the herd after the blizzard and plans for the spring calving season. Catherine found herself drawn into their discussions, asking questions about the ranch operations and offering observations from her own brief explorations of the property. "You've got a quick mind, Miss Catherine," Emmett commented approvingly. "Most city folk take months to start understanding ranch matters." "I've always been a fast learner," Catherine replied modestly, "and I had an excellent teacher in my father. He believed in understanding the principles behind things, not just memorizing facts." "She's been taking notes all day," Sarah added with a fond smile. "Recipes, household inventories, even started a list of supplies we'll need from town." Yates looked at Catherine with unmistakable pride. "I told you she was remarkable," he said to no one in particular, though his eyes remained fixed on her. Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the open admiration in his gaze. Around the table, the hands exchanged knowing glances, clearly pleased by the obvious affection developing between their boss and his bride-to-be. After dinner, Sarah shooed everyone from the kitchen, insisting that as this was her welcome feast, she would handle the cleanup. The men retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving Yates and Catherine alone in the sitting room where a fresh fire crackled in the hearth. "Your hands seem like good men," Catherine observed as she settled into one of the armchairs. "The best," Yates agreed, taking the chair opposite her. "Loyal, hardworking, honest, couldn't run this place without them. And they clearly respect you greatly," she added. "The way they defer to your judgment, look to you for decisions." Yates shrugged slightly, uncomfortable with the praise. "We've been through a lot together, blizzards, droughts, good years and bad. That builds a certain bond." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the popping of the fire and the occasional clink of dishes from the kitchen where Sarah worked. "I thought we might ride into town tomorrow," Yates said finally. "The roads should be passable by now, at least with the sleigh. We could speak to Reverend Adams about the ceremony." Catherine nodded, her stomach fluttering at the reminder of their impending marriage. "Yes, that would be good. And perhaps I could see a bit of Clifton Hill properly this time, not just through a blizzard." "It's not much to look at," Yates warned her. "One main street, a handful of side streets. General store, post office, church, schoolhouse, saloon, livery stable, and a few dozen houses. But it serves our needs." "It sounds charming," Catherine said sincerely, "and I should like to see the schoolhouse especially. Perhaps meet Miss Foster if she's available." Yates studied her thoughtfully. "You're truly interested in teaching, aren't you?" "I am," Catherine confirmed. "I found great satisfaction in it during the brief time I taught in Boston. There's something wonderful about watching a child grasp a new concept, seeing that moment of understanding dawn in their eyes." "I'll introduce you to Abigail Foster tomorrow then," Yates promised. "She's been saying for years that she needs an assistant, especially for the younger children. The school board hasn't had the funds to hire anyone, but perhaps a volunteer arrangement might be possible." Catherine beamed at him, touched by his willingness to support her interests. "Thank you. That would mean a great deal to me." Sarah emerged from the kitchen then, wiping her hands on her apron. "All done," she announced. "And I've left a pot of stew simmering for your lunch tomorrow, Miss Catherine, just needs reheating." "You're too kind," Catherine said, rising to embrace the older woman. "Thank you for everything today, the meal, the company, the advice." "My pleasure entirely," Sarah assured her. "It's been a joy having another woman to talk to. Most days it's just me and a house full of men who think conversation consists of grunts and nods." Emmett appeared at the door just then, as if summoned by his wife's words. "Ready to head to the bunkhouse, woman. It's getting late, and these young folks might want some privacy." Sarah rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "He thinks he's being subtle," she stage whispered to Catherine, who laughed. To her husband she added, "Yes, I'm ready, just let me gather my things." After the Turners had departed with promises to see them in town the next day, Yates and Catherine were truly alone for the first time since their arrival at the ranch. The house settled around them, creaking occasionally as the temperature dropped outside. "Another day and it will have been a week since you arrived in Clifton Hill," Yates observed, adding another log to the fire. "Hard to believe." "It does seem longer somehow," Catherine agreed, "perhaps because so much has happened." Yates returned to his chair, regarding her with a warmth that sent a pleasant shiver through her. "No regrets? About coming here, I mean?" "None," Catherine said without hesitation. "Though I admit, when the train was approaching the station and I could see nothing but white through the windows, I had a moment of doubt. But then the conductor helped me down, and there you were, waiting in the blizzard." She smiled at the memory. "That's when I knew I'd made the right choice." "Because I was stubborn enough to stand in a snowstorm?" Yates asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Because you kept your word," Catherine corrected gently. "Because you were there, just as you said you would be, despite conditions that would have given most men a perfectly reasonable excuse to delay. It spoke to your character, Yates." He looked momentarily taken aback by her assessment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "I'm glad I didn't disappoint you." "Far from it," Catherine assured him. "In fact, I find myself more impressed with each passing day." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. Yates's eyes darkened slightly, and Catherine felt a corresponding warmth bloom in her chest. "Catherine," he began, his voice rougher than usual, "I know we agreed to wait until after the ceremony, but I find myself wanting." A sharp knock at the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Yates frowned, glancing at the clock on the mantel, which showed it was past 9. Who could that be at this hour? Catherine wondered aloud. Yates rose, his expression concerned. "No one, unless there's trouble." He strode to the door and pulled it open to reveal Daniel Cooper, the youngest of the hands, his face flushed with cold and urgency. "Boss," he said without preamble, "it's that new mare, the one we were working with today. She's foaling and it's not going right." "Marcus says the foal is turned wrong." Yates cursed under his breath, then glanced back at Catherine apologetically. "I need to go," he said. "A difficult birth can mean losing both mare and foal if it's not handled properly." "Of course," Catherine said, already rising from her chair. "Do you need help? My father taught me something about difficult births, though mostly in humans." Yates hesitated, then nodded. "The principles are similar. If you're willing, an extra pair of hands could make the difference." "I'll get my coat," Catherine said decisively. Minutes later, they were trudging through the snow toward the barn, following Daniel's lantern. Inside, the large structure was warm with the collective body heat of the horses and lit by several lanterns hanging from the rafters. Near the back, in a large stall bedded deeply with straw, the mare in question lay on her side, her sides heaving with effort while Marcus knelt beside her, his face grim. "She's exhausting herself," he reported as Yates and Catherine approached. "Foal's front leg is turned back, I think. Can't get the position right to help her." Yates nodded, already removing his coat. Catherine has some medical knowledge, he said to Marcus. Let her take a look. Marcus raised an eyebrow but moved aside without comment. Catherine approached the laboring mare cautiously, speaking in soft, soothing tones as she knelt in the straw. Easy, girl, she murmured, placing a gentle hand on the horse's heaving flank. We're here to help. With careful movements, Catherine examined the mare, feeling for the position of the foal. Her father had occasionally been called to assist with difficult animal births on the estates of his wealthier patients, and he had always taken Catherine with him when appropriate, believing practical experience was the best teacher. You're right, she confirmed after a moment. The foal's shoulder is presented first, with the leg folded back. We need to gently push it back into the birth canal and guide the leg forward before she can deliver. Can you do it? Yates asked, kneeling beside her. Catherine considered for a moment. My hands are smaller than yours, she said practically. That might be an advantage in this case, but I'll need your strength to help keep her calm and steady. For the next half hour, they worked together in tense concentration. Catherine, with Yates's guidance on equine anatomy, carefully maneuvered the foal into the correct position for birth. The mare, exhausted by her earlier efforts, seemed to understand they were trying to help, remaining relatively still despite her discomfort. Finally, Catherine felt the foal shift into the proper position. There, she said with quiet triumph. The head and both front legs are aligned now. She should be able to deliver with just a few good pushes. Sure enough, with the next contraction, the foal began to emerge properly. Catherine and Yates supported the tiny legs as they appeared, and within minutes, a wet, gangly colt slid into the world, landing in the straw with a soft thump. The mare immediately twisted her head around, nickering softly to her baby. Catherine and Yates moved back, giving mother and foal space for their first meeting. The colt, a handsome bay with a white blaze down his face, struggled to raise his head, blinking enormous dark eyes at the world he had just entered. He's perfect, Catherine breathed, watching as the newborn made his first wobbly attempts to rise. Thanks to you, Yates said, his voice warm with admiration. That was incredible, Catherine. Where did you learn to do that? My father, she explained, her eyes still on the miracle before them. He believed in practical education. Said books could only teach so much, the rest had to be learned by doing. He was right, Yates agreed. He looked at her then, really looked at her, kneeling in the straw with hay in her hair and the sleeves of her dress rolled up, her face flushed with exertion and triumph. You're remarkable. The simple statement, spoken with such sincerity, touched Catherine deeply. She met his gaze, seeing in his eyes a respect and admiration that went beyond mere gratitude for her help. We make a good team, she said softly. Yes, Yates agreed, his voice equally quiet. We do. The moment stretched between them, electric with unspoken emotions. Then the colt wobbled to his feet for the first time, breaking the spell as everyone in the barn cheered the small victory. Marcus approached, looking at Catherine with new respect. That was some fine work, Miss O'Malley. Don't know that I've ever seen a breech birth handled so smoothly. Catherine has a gift, Yates said simply, rising and offering his hand to help her up from the straw. We're fortunate she was here. They stayed in the barn a while longer, ensuring that the colt was nursing properly and that the mare was recovering well from her ordeal. By the time they finally headed back to the house, it was nearly midnight, and the temperature had dropped significantly, turning the snow crunchy beneath their boots. You should name him, Yates said as they walked side by side through the moonlit night, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. The colt? Catherine asked, surprised. Yates nodded. It seems fitting. You helped bring him into the world. Catherine considered for a moment. Lazarus, she decided, because he was brought back from the brink. Lazarus, Yates repeated, testing the name. I like it. It suits him. They reached the house, stomping snow from their boots before entering the warm interior. The fire in the sitting room had burned down to embers, casting a soft, red glow over the furniture. I'll build it back up, Yates offered, moving toward the hearth. Thank you, Catherine said, suddenly aware of how tired she was. The adrenaline of the birth had worn off, leaving her drained but satisfied. I think I'll head upstairs. It's been quite a day. Yates straightened from the fireplace, regarding her thoughtfully. It has indeed. Sleep well, Catherine. You too, Yates. She hesitated, then crossed to where he stood and, rising on tiptoe, pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Thank you for trusting me tonight with the mare and foal. Yates looked momentarily stunned by the gesture, then his expression softened into a smile that transformed his entire face. Thank you for being someone I could trust. Catherine climbed the stairs to her room with a warm glow in her chest that had nothing to do with exertion or the physical warmth of the house. As she prepared for bed, washing away the evidence of her work in the barn, she found herself humming softly, a contentment settling over her that was both new and deeply familiar, as if she had finally found her way home after a long journey. Outside her window, the moon cast silver light over the snow-covered landscape of Montgomery, her ranch now, her home, her future. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, Catherine felt ready to face them, with Yates by her side. Morning brought clear skies and milder temperatures, a welcome change after days of brutal cold. Catherine woke to the sounds of activity outside, men's voices, the whinny of horses, the clatter of tools against wood. She dressed quickly in one of her sturdier dresses, a deep blue wool that would be practical for a trip to town, and pinned her hair in a simple but neat arrangement before heading downstairs. In the kitchen, she found Yates already up and cooking, the scent of coffee and frying bacon filling the warm space. Good morning, he greeted her with a smile that seemed to light up his entire face. I thought I'd give you a break from cooking today. That's very thoughtful, Catherine replied, returning his smile as she accepted the cup of coffee he offered. How is our new arrival this morning? Lazarus is doing well, Yates reported. Already on his feet and nursing strongly, the mare we call her Duchess is recovering nicely too. Marcus says it's all thanks to you. Catherine waved away the praise. It was teamwork, as I said last night. Besides, I was merely applying principles my father taught me. Nevertheless, Yates insisted, you saved a valuable mare and what looks to be a promising colt. The hands are impressed, and so am I. They ate breakfast together, discussing the day ahead. Yates had arranged for Jenkins's sleigh to be brought out from town to take them in, as the roads were still too deep with snow for a wagon or horseback travel. The sleigh should be here by 9, Yates told her. We can be in town by 10, meet with Reverend Adams, and still have time to show you around Clifton Hill properly before heading back. Catherine nodded, a flutter of anticipation in her stomach at the thought of making their marriage official. That sounds perfect. After breakfast, while waiting for the sleigh to arrive, Catherine decided to check on Duchess and her foal. She made her way to the barn, inhaling the familiar scents of hay, horses, and leather that reminded her of visits to country estates with her father. She found the mare and foal much as Yates had described Duchess, was calmly eating from a hay net, while Lazarus, his spindly legs now more coordinated, explored the boundaries of their stall with typical newborn curiosity. Daniel Cooper was nearby, mucking out a neighboring stall, and he paused in his work to greet her. Morning, Miss O'Malley. Come to check on your patient, Catherine smiled, approaching the stall cautiously so as not to alarm the mare. I thought I'd see how they're faring this morning." "Like they never had a lick of trouble," Daniel said admiringly. "That was something to see last night, the way you handled that birth. Most city ladies would have fainted dead away at the sight." "I'm not most city ladies," Catherine replied mildly, reaching out to let Duchess sniff her hand before gently stroking the mare's velvety nose. "And I believe practical knowledge is far more valuable than delicate sensibilities." Daniel grinned, leaning on his pitchfork. "The boss sure found himself a special one in you, madam, if you don't mind me saying so." "I don't mind," Catherine assured him, turning her attention to Lazarus, who had approached cautiously to investigate this new human. The colt's legs still wobbled slightly, but his eyes were bright and curious, his coat already beginning to dry into a rich bay that promised to be quite handsome when he matured. "He's got good lines," Daniel commented, seeing her interest in the foal. "Duchess is one of our best mares, and the sire is Thunder, our stallion. He's out in the south pasture now, but you'll meet him soon enough. This little fellow could be worth a pretty penny when he's grown, especially with that blaze on his face." Catherine stayed for a while longer, talking with Daniel about the horses on the ranch, learning about their breeding program and the specific qualities they looked for in their stock. By the time she heard the sound of sleigh bells in the yard, announcing the arrival of their transportation to town, she felt she had gained a basic understanding of at least this aspect of ranch operations. Yates was waiting by the porch when she emerged from the barn, and the appreciation in his eyes as he looked at her brought a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold air. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her into the sleigh. "Yes," Catherine replied with a smile, settling herself among the blankets and furs that lined the conveyance. The journey to town was far easier than their previous trip from the station, with the roads now partially cleared and the weather cooperating. Yates pointed out landmarks as they traveled neighboring ranches, the creek that ran through their property, the ridge where they sometimes spotted deer in the early mornings. Clifton Hill appeared on the horizon after about an hour, a cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. As they drew closer, Catherine could make out the church spire, the two-story brick schoolhouse, and the wide main street lined with various businesses. "It's larger than I expected," she commented as they entered the town proper, passing neat houses with smoke curling from chimneys. "Grown considerably in the last 5 years," Yates told her. "The railroad connection helped, and there's talk of a flour mill opening next year which would bring more jobs." They stopped first at the church, a modest white building with a tall steeple and stained glass windows that gleamed in the winter sunlight. Reverend James Adams was in his study, a young man of perhaps 30 with an open, friendly face and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Yates," he exclaimed, rising from his desk to shake hands warmly. "And this must be Miss O'Malley. A pleasure to meet you, madam. I've heard much about your adventurous arrival during the blizzard." "News travels quickly, it seems," Catherine observed with a smile, taking an immediate liking to the energetic young minister. "Small towns run on gossip and goodwill," Adams replied cheerfully. "Now, I understand you're here to discuss a wedding." They settled into comfortable chairs as Yates explained their situation and desire for a simple ceremony as soon as possible. Reverend Adams nodded thoughtfully, consulting a calendar on his desk. "How about this Saturday?" he suggested. "That would give time for the necessary paperwork and allow me to post the banns, though I doubt there will be any objections." Catherine glanced at Yates, who nodded his agreement. "Saturday would be perfect," she confirmed. "Excellent." Adams made a note in his ledger. "Shall we say 2 o'clock? That would allow time for any guests you might wish to invite." "Just a small gathering," Yates clarified. "The hands from the ranch, Sarah Turner, perhaps a few others. And Mrs. Miller from the boarding house," Catherine added. "She was very kind to us during the blizzard." The details were quickly arranged, a simple ceremony in the church, followed by refreshments in the adjoining parish hall. Reverend Adams provided the necessary forms for them to complete, and by the time they left the church, Catherine found herself wearing the ring Yates had given her with an even greater sense of purpose. "Well, that's settled," Yates said as they walked back to where the sleigh waited. "In 3 days, you'll officially be Mrs. Montgomery." The thought sent a pleasant shiver through Catherine. It seems so fast, yet also as if we've known each other much longer than a week. "Shared adversity has a way of accelerating relationships," Yates observed with a slight smile. "And we certainly had our share of that at the beginning." Their next stop was the general store, a large, well-stocked establishment owned by Walter and Martha Simmons, a couple in their 60s who greeted Yates with the familiarity of long acquaintance. "So this is the bride we've been hearing about," Martha exclaimed, coming around the counter to clasp Catherine's hands warmly. "My dear, you're even lovelier than Gertrude described, and so brave, traveling all this way in winter." Catherine thanked her, feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the effusive welcome but pleased by the genuine warmth behind it. As Yates discussed his order for ranch supplies with Walter, Martha drew Catherine aside to show her the store's selection of fabrics, household goods, and other items that might interest a new bride. "We get shipments from St. Louis twice a month," Martha explained, displaying a bolt of fine blue calico. "And Walter makes a trip to Jefferson City every quarter to select special items. If there's anything particular you're looking for, just let us know, and we'll do our best to find it." By the time they left the store, Yates had placed a substantial order for ranch supplies to be delivered the following week, and Catherine had selected material for new curtains for the sitting room, a deed Yates had encouraged with obvious pleasure. "Making the house your own is important," he had said when she hesitated over the purchase. "I want you to feel it's truly your home, not just mine that you're inhabiting." Their next stop was the schoolhouse, where they found Miss Abigail Foster presiding over a classroom of 20 children ranging in age from 6 to 16. Despite the recent blizzard, school was in session, the building warm and filled with the sounds of children reciting multiplication tables. Miss Foster was a tall, spare woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Despite her somewhat intimidating appearance, Catherine observed that the children seemed at ease with her, responding to her firm but fair teaching style. When the noon recess was called and the children spilled out into the snow-covered yard, Miss Foster invited Yates and Catherine into her small office at the back of the classroom. "So you're the Boston lady who's tamed our confirmed bachelor," she said without preamble, studying Catherine with undisguised curiosity. "And I hear you have an interest in teaching." "I do," Catherine confirmed. "I taught briefly in Boston before my father's illness required my full attention." Miss Foster's expression gave away nothing. "What subjects?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, basic sciences," Catherine replied, "and music when the opportunity arose." This last addition seemed to pique Miss Foster's interest. "Music, you say? We're sorely lacking in that area." "I can manage the basics, but I've no ear for it myself." "Catherine plays the guitar and has a lovely singing voice," Yates contributed, surprising her with his praise. Miss Foster's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so? Well, perhaps we might work out an arrangement. I could certainly use help with the younger children, particularly now that the Miller twins have started. 5-year-olds with more energy than sense, those two." By the time they left the schoolhouse, Catherine had agreed to visit once a week, weather permitting, to assist with the younger students and provide music instruction for those interested. The arrangement was informal for now, but Miss Foster had hinted that the school board might be persuaded to offer a small stipend if the arrangement proved successful. "She liked you," Yates observed as they walked back toward the center of town. "Abigail Foster doesn't suffer fools gladly, so that's high praise indeed." Catherine smiled, pleased by the assessment. "I liked her too. She reminds me of my mathematics tutor in Boston, stern on the outside but with a genuine passion for education." They took lunch at Clifton Hill's only restaurant, a small establishment attached to the hotel, where Catherine was introduced to yet more townspeople who stopped by their table to meet Yates Montgomery's mail-order bride. Despite the potentially awkward situation, Catherine found herself welcomed with genuine warmth and curiosity rather than judgment. "They seem to approve of me," she commented to Yates as they finished their meal. "Did you expect otherwise?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. Catherine shrugged slightly. In some communities, a mail-order bride might be viewed with suspicion or as somehow less respectable. "Not here," Yates assured her. "Half the women in this county came as mail-order brides in the early days. It's a practical solution to a common problem in frontier areas: too many men, not enough women. Besides," he added with a wry smile, "they're just relieved I finally found someone. There was a betting pool at the saloon about whether I'd die a bachelor." "Who won?" Catherine asked, amused. "Sarah Turner, apparently," Yates replied. "She put money on me finding a wife before I turned 35, said I was too good a man to waste." The admission brought a warm flush to Catherine's cheeks. "She was right," she said softly. The rest of the afternoon was spent completing their tour of Clifton Hill. Yates showed her the post office, the small doctor's office where Dr. Gardner practiced, the livery stable, and the various shops that lined the main street. They finished at the milliner's shop, where Sarah Turner had suggested Catherine might want to order a hat for the wedding. "Nothing fancy," Catherine insisted to Mrs. Parker, the milliner, "just something suitable for a bride." The result was a simple but elegant bonnet of cream-colored satin with a modest veil that could be worn afterward for church or special occasions. Yates insisted on paying for it despite Catherine's protests, calling it a wedding gift. As they prepared to leave town, the sun already beginning its descent toward the western horizon, Catherine felt a growing sense of belonging to this community. Everyone they had encountered had been welcoming, treating her not as an outsider or curiosity, but as Yates Montgomery's chosen bride, a position that clearly carried respect in Clifton Hill. The return journey to the ranch was peaceful, the sleigh gliding smoothly over the snow as the afternoon light turned golden around them. Catherine sat close to Yates, sharing the warmth of the blankets and the companionable silence that had become natural between them. "Are you happy?" Yates asked suddenly, breaking the quiet as the ranch buildings appeared on the horizon. Catherine looked up at him, surprised by the directness of the question. "Yes," she said simply. "Happier than I expected to be, if I'm honest." "As am I," Yates admitted, his voice low. "When I placed that advertisement, I hoped for a practical partnership, someone who could share the work and perhaps, in time, develop some affection. I never imagined—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words for what had grown between them in such a short time. Catherine understood. She too found it difficult to articulate the connection that had formed so quickly, so unexpectedly. "3 more days," she said softly, watching his profile against the setting sun. "And then we begin our life together properly." Yates glanced down at her, his eyes warm with an emotion that sent a flutter through her chest. "I can hardly wait," he replied, and the simple honesty in his voice was more moving than any elaborate declaration could have been. As the sleigh drew up to the house, Catherine realized with perfect clarity that this was where she belonged here, with this man in this place. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, building a life on the foundation they had established in these extraordinary first days of their acquaintance. The 3 days leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity. Catherine threw herself into preparations, determined that their small ceremony would be as perfect as possible under the circumstances. She baked a wedding cake with Sarah's assistance, using a cherished recipe her mother had passed down. She pressed her best dress, a deep blue silk, that she had brought from Boston for formal occasions, and spent an evening carefully stitching a small alteration to make it more suitable as a wedding gown. Yates, for his part, seemed content to let her manage the preparations, though he insisted on handling certain details himself. He rode into town again on Friday to collect their marriage license and to confirm final arrangements with Reverend Adams. He returned with a small box that he refused to show Catherine, saying only that it was a surprise for the wedding day. Saturday dawned clear and surprisingly mild for February in Missouri. Catherine woke early, a flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach as she realized that by sunset she would be Mrs. Yates Montgomery in truth, not just in intention. Sarah arrived mid-morning to help her prepare, bringing with her a bouquet of hothouse flowers that must have cost a small fortune to obtain in winter white roses and lily of the valley, tied with a blue ribbon that matched Catherine's dress. Mrs. Parker at the milliner's shop grows them in her conservatory, Sarah explained as Catherine exclaimed over the beautiful arrangement. She sends them to Jefferson City most winters, but saved these when she heard about the wedding. Said every bride deserves flowers, even in February. The kindness of the gesture brought tears to Catherine's eyes. In the week since her arrival, she had been continually touched by the warmth and generosity of the community, the way they had embraced her without reservation. Sarah helped her dress, arranging her hair in an elegant style before carefully securing the new bonnet with its modest veil. When Catherine looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself, not because of any dramatic transformation in her appearance, but because of the joy that seemed to illuminate her from within. "You look beautiful," Sarah said softly, adjusting the fall of the dress over Catherine's shoulders. "Yates won't know what hit him," Catherine smiled, a blush rising to her cheeks. "Do you think he'll be pleased, my dear? That man has been walking on air since you arrived," Sarah assured her. "I've known Yates Montgomery for 12 years, and I've never seen him as happy as he's been this past week. You're exactly what he needed, though he probably didn't know it when he placed that advertisement." A knock at the door announced Emmett, come to tell them the sleigh was ready to depart for town. "You ladies best hurry," he called through the door. "The boss is pacing a hole in the porch downstairs, afraid we'll be late." Catherine gathered her bouquet, took a deep breath, and followed Sarah down the stairs. In the front hall, Yates waited, dressed in what was clearly his best suit, a dark wool that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. He had trimmed his beard and combed his hair neatly, and when he looked up and saw Catherine descending the stairs, the expression that crossed his face was one she would remember for the rest of her life. "Catherine," he breathed, moving forward to meet her at the bottom of the staircase. "You're beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. "You look very handsome yourself." Sarah and Emmett exchanged knowing glances before tactfully moving toward the door. "We'll wait in the sleigh," Sarah announced. "Don't be too long now." When they were alone, Yates took Catherine's hands in his his eyes never leaving her face. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing the small box he had brought from town the previous day. "A wedding gift." Catherine set her bouquet aside and accepted the box with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a pair of earbobs, simple gold drops set with small pearls that caught the light as she lifted them from the box. "They're exquisite," she whispered, deeply touched by the thoughtful gift. "They belong to my grandmother," Yates explained. "My mother left them to me, said I should give them to my wife one day. I had them cleaned and the settings checked in town yesterday." Catherine's eyes filled with tears at the significance of the gift. First his mother's ring, now these heirlooms. He was truly making her part of his family, his history. "Will you help me put them on?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Yates nodded, taking the delicate jewelry from her hands. With surprising gentleness for a man with such work-roughened fingers, he helped her remove the simple gold studs she was wearing and replace them with his gift. The pearl drops felt cool against her neck, a tangible symbol of her new identity. "Perfect," Yates murmured, stepping back to admire the effect. "As if they were made for you." Catherine touched the earbobs lightly, blinking back tears. "Thank you, Yates. I'll treasure them always." "We should go," he said reluctantly, offering his arm. "Reverend Adams will be waiting, and I've kept you to myself long enough." The sleigh ride to town was a blur for Catherine, her mind too full of the impending ceremony to notice much of the journey. Before she knew it, they were arriving at the church, where a small group had already gathered to witness their union. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. Standing before Reverend Adams in the church, decorated with winter greenery and a few precious hothouse flowers, Catherine and Yates exchanged vows with clear voices and sure hearts. When Yates slipped the gold band onto her finger to join his mother's engagement ring, Catherine felt a profound sense of rightness, of completion. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Adams pronounced with evident pleasure, "I now declare you husband and wife. Yates, you may kiss your bride." Yates turned to her, his eyes warm with an emotion that needed no words. Gently, he lifted the small veil from her face and leaned down to press his lips to hers in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. It was their first kiss, and as his lips met hers, Catherine felt a warmth spread through her entire being, a certainty that this man, this marriage, was exactly where she was meant to be. The small gathering erupted in applause as they separated, both slightly flushed. Gertrude Miller was openly weeping, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, while Sarah beamed like a proud mother. The ranch hands Emmett, Marcus, Daniel, and Josiah grinned and exchanged knowing looks, clearly pleased for their boss and his new wife. The reception in the parish hall was a joyful affair, with food contributed by various townspeople and music provided by a local fiddler and his son. Catherine was introduced to what seemed like the entire population of Clifton Hill, all of whom welcomed her warmly into their community. "You've transformed him," Gertrude commented as they watched Yates in conversation with the mayor across the room. "I've known that man for 12 years, and I've never seen him smile so much in a single day." Catherine followed her gaze, her heart swelling with affection at the sight of her new husband. "He's transformed me too," she admitted softly. "I came here seeking security, a new start I never expected to find. This. Love has a way of surprising us," Gertrude said wisely. "Especially when we're not looking for it." The celebration continued into the late afternoon, but as the winter sun began to dip toward the horizon, Yates found Catherine among the well-wishers and suggested it was time to head home. The journey back to the ranch was made in a different sleigh than the one that had brought them, a smaller, more elegant conveyance decorated with ribbons and bells, clearly prepared as a surprise for the new bride. "The hands arranged it," Yates explained as he helped her into the sleigh amid a shower of rice thrown by their guests. "They'll follow with Sarah and Emmett in the larger sleigh." As they pulled away from the church, the sound of cheers and well wishes fading behind them, Catherine leaned against Yates's shoulder, a profound contentment settling over her. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. "Mrs. Montgomery," Yates said softly, testing the name. "How does it sound to you?" Catherine smiled up at him, her heart full. "It sounds perfect," she replied, "like it was always meant to be mine." The ranch was transformed when they arrived home at twilight. Lanterns had been hung along the porch and pathway, casting a warm glow over the snow. Inside, the house was equally welcoming, with fires lit in every hearth and vases of winter greenery placed strategically throughout the rooms. "The women from town came out yesterday while we were busy with final preparations," Yates explained as he helped Catherine remove her bonnet and coat. "Sarah organized it as a wedding surprise." "It's wonderful," Catherine said, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of her new neighbors and friends. "Everything is perfect." They were alone for only a short time before the second sleigh arrived, bringing Sarah, Emmett, and the hands. Sarah had prepared a wedding supper, which was served in the dining room amid much laughter and toasting of the new couple. Catherine's cake was the centerpiece of the celebration, its rich layers of spice cake and creamy filling drawing appreciative comments from everyone. As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself watching Yates with new eyes, not as the stranger she had agreed to marry or even as the man she had come to know over the past week, but as her husband, the partner with whom she would build a life. The realization brought a warmth to her cheeks, and a flutter to her stomach that had nothing to do with the small glass of champagne Emmett had insisted on providing for the toasts. Eventually, the guests departed for the bunkhouse, leaving Yates and Catherine alone in their home for the first time as husband and wife. A moment of awkwardness descended as the door closed behind Sarah and Emmett, both suddenly aware of the significance of the night ahead. "Would you like some tea before bed?" Yates offered, breaking the silence. Catherine nodded, grateful for the ordinary suggestion that gave them both a moment to adjust to their new reality. They moved to the kitchen together, the familiar routine of heating water and preparing cups, creating a sense of normality in the midst of this extraordinary day. As they sat at the kitchen table with their tea, Yates reached across to take Catherine's hand, his thumb gently stroking the gold band that now accompanied his mother's ring on her finger. "Are you happy, Catherine?" he asked quietly, his eyes serious as they met hers. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "When I answered your advertisement, I hoped for security, perhaps companionship. I never expected to find this." Yates prompted gently. Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks but held his gaze steadily. "A man I could not only respect but care for deeply, a community that has welcomed me as one of their own, a purpose beyond mere survival." She paused, gathering her courage. "A love I wasn't looking for but am profoundly grateful to have found." Yates's expression softened at her words, his eyes warming with an emotion that made her heart race. "I love you, Catherine Montgomery," he said simply, the declaration all the more powerful for its straightforwardness. "I think I began falling in love with you the moment I saw you step off that train in the middle of a blizzard, determined and unafraid." Catherine's eyes filled with tears of joy at his words. "And I love you, Yates Montgomery. I think I began falling in love with you when I realized you had waited at that station for 3 days, keeping your word no matter what." He rose from his chair then, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. This time when their lips met, there was no audience, no ceremonial formality, just a man and woman expressing the love that had bloomed between them against all odds and expectations. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers, his arms still encircling her waist. "Shall we go upstairs?" he asked softly, his voice rough with emotion. Catherine nodded, her heart racing with anticipation and newfound certainty. "Yes," she whispered. "Take me to our room, husband." As they ascended the stairs together, hand in hand, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From a desperate decision made in a Boston townhouse to a snowbound arrival in Clifton Hill, from a practical arrangement to a love she had never expected to find, it had all led here, to this night, to this man who looked at her as if she were the answer to every question he had ever asked. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting down in the moonlight, but inside the Montgomery ranch house, all was warmth and promise and the beginning of a life together that neither Yates nor Catherine could have imagined when she stepped off that train into a blizzard just 10 days before. 5 years later, the spring sunshine streamed through the windows of the Montgomery ranch house, illuminating a scene of domestic tranquility that would have seemed impossible to Catherine when she first arrived in Missouri that snowy February day. In the large kitchen expanded 2 years ago to accommodate the growing family, Catherine stood at the stove, stirring a pot of stew while keeping one eye on 3-year-old James, who sat at the table solemnly reading a picture book. "Mama, horse," he announced, pointing to an illustration with a chubby finger. "Yes, darling, that's a horse," Catherine confirmed with a smile. "Like Papa's horses in the barn." "My horse," James declared with the certainty only a toddler could muster. Catherine laughed, setting aside her spoon to drop a kiss on her son's dark head. "When you're bigger, sweetheart, Papa says you can have your very own pony when you turn 5, remember?" The sound of the front door opening drew her attention, and moments later, Yates appeared in the kitchen doorway, his tall frame filling the space. 5 years of marriage had only enhanced his rugged good looks, adding perhaps a few more lines around his eyes, but also a settled contentment to his expression that had been missing when they first met. "There's my boy," he said warmly, crossing to ruffle James's hair. "And there's my beautiful wife," he added, circling the table to plant a kiss on Catherine's lips that still sent a flutter through her heart after all this time. "You're home early," she observed, leaning into his embrace for a moment before returning to her stew. "I thought you and Emmett were riding the north boundary today." "We were," Yates confirmed, helping himself to a cup of coffee from the pot keeping warm on the back of the stove. "But we finished faster than expected. The new fence line is holding well after the spring rains." He settled into a chair beside James, admiring the child's reading with all the seriousness the activity deserved. Their son was the image of Yates, with the same dark hair and strong features, though his eyes were Catherine's clear blue. "Where's Sarah?" Yates asked, glancing around as if expecting to see their daughter appear. "Napping, thank goodness," Catherine replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Riley is sitting with her. She finally fell asleep after fighting it all morning." Sarah Montgomery, at 18 months, was proving to be as strong-willed as both her parents combined, a spirited, curious child who exhausted everyone around her with her energy and determination. Named for Sarah Turner, who had become Catherine's closest friend and confidante, the little girl was as fair as her brother was dark, with auburn curls that were the despair of anyone trying to tame them. "That child," Yates said with a fond shake of his head, is going to run this ranch someday, mark my words. Probably before she's 12, Catherine agreed with a laugh. Speaking of the ranch, Daniel tells me Lazarus's first foals are showing exceptional promise, the bay filly especially. Yates nodded, his expression pleased. She's something special, that one. I'm thinking of keeping her for our breeding program rather than selling her to the cavalry. The mention of Lazarus, now a magnificent stallion in his prime, always brought a smile to Catherine's face. The foal she had helped deliver on her second night at the ranch had grown into the foundation of their expanded horse breeding operation, which had flourished under Yates's careful management and Catherine's surprisingly apt touch with the animals. Their life together had evolved in ways neither could have predicted when they stood before Reverend Adams 5 years ago. The ranch had prospered, allowing them to add more land and improve the original buildings. The house now boasted a proper library addition, filled with books Catherine had carefully selected from catalogs and trips to St. Louis, as well as an expanded kitchen and a nursery for the children. Catherine herself had grown into her role as rancher's wife, with a natural grace that impressed everyone who knew her. She had learned to ride well enough to accompany Yates on his rounds of the property, mastered the art of preserving the bounty of her now extensive vegetable garden, and still found time to assist at the Clifton Hill School 2 days a week, where her music lessons had become the highlight of many children's education. More than that, she had become a respected member of the community, serving on the church ladies' auxiliary, helping Dr. Gardner with difficult cases that required an extra pair of trained hands, and even being elected to the school board the previous year, the first woman to hold such a position in the county. I saw Gertrude Miller in town yesterday, Yates mentioned as he helped James turn a page in his book. She asked when we're coming for dinner next, says she hasn't seen the children in an age. We should invite her out here instead, Catherine suggested. The journey is getting difficult for her, especially now that her arthritis is bothering her again. Perhaps next Sunday after church. Yates nodded his agreement, and they fell into a comfortable discussion of plans and schedules, the rhythm of a shared life built on mutual respect and deepening love. Catherine marveled sometimes at how seamlessly they had merged their very different backgrounds and experiences into a partnership that drew on the strengths of both. A cry from upstairs announced that Sarah was awake, and Yates rose immediately. "I'll get her," he offered. "You finish the stew." Catherine watched him go, his long strides carrying him quickly from the room, and felt a rush of affection so strong it nearly took her breath away. The man who had waited at a train station for 3 days in a blizzard had proven to be everything she could have hoped for in a husband, strong yet gentle, hard-working yet capable of tenderness, a partner in every sense of the word. When Yates returned a few minutes later with Sarah in his arms, the little girl's face still flushed from sleep, her auburn curls in disarray, Catherine felt the familiar sense of rightness that had become the foundation of her life here. This family, this home, this love, all of it had grown from a desperate decision, and a snowbound meeting that might never have happened if either of them had been less determined. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, noticing her thoughtful expression as he settled Sarah in her high chair. "You have that look." "I was just remembering the day I arrived," Catherine admitted with a smile. "That terrible blizzard, and you standing on the platform as if a little snow couldn't possibly deter you from keeping your promise." Yates's expression softened with the memory. "Best 3 days I ever spent freezing on a train platform," he said with quiet certainty. "Though Harold Peterson thought I was insane. He told me later he'd never seen a man so determined," Catherine said, moving to place a kiss on her husband's cheek. "Said he knew then that you'd make me a good husband." "And have I?" Yates asked, his tone light but his eyes serious as they met hers. Been a good husband. Catherine looked around at the warm kitchen, at their beautiful children, at the life they had built together, and felt a happiness so complete it seemed to fill every corner of her being. The very best, she assured him, standing on tiptoe to place another kiss, this time on his lips. Far better than I ever dreamed possible when I answered your advertisement. And you, Yates murmured, his arm circling her waist, have been far more than the practical partner I thought I was seeking. You've been the heart of this home, Catherine. The best decision I ever made was waiting for that train. As their children watched with the solemn curiosity of the very young, Yates kissed his wife again, a kiss that held all the tenderness of their years together and the promise of many more to come. Outside, the Missouri spring continued its relentless greening of the landscape, the cycle of seasons that had witnessed their meeting, their marriage, and the growth of their family. And in the heart of the Montgomery ranch, a love born in the most unlikely circumstances, a mail-order bride arriving during a blizzard. A cowboy who waited 3 days at a train station continued to flourish, as strong and enduring as the land itself.